It's Christmas time, and this is the Paperback Warrior Podcast.
Welcome back to the last episode of 2019 here at Paperback Warrior Podcast. We thank you so much for listening to this show as well as following us all year long. It's been a great year. So happy with our progress here with the podcast and with our show. Keep in mind that our flagship site is paperbackwarrior.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. My co-host Tom is here with me as well, and looks like you've been doing a little shopping.
Yeah, before I get into what came in the mail, I just want to let you know that this is going to be our last episode of the year. We're going to be taking a couple weeks off to do some reading, writing, and recording. We will be back with podcast episode number 25 on January 6, 2020. The other thing to know is that in 2020, the podcast is going to be our only Monday content. The paperbackwarrior.com blog will have new reviews Tuesday through Friday and then reruns every day and on the weekends. But we don't want to compete with ourselves. We wanted to make the podcast kind of a Monday feast for you, and it'll be posted on our social media at 6 a.m. on Mondays, East Coast time. Anyway, like you said, I've been getting some stuff in the mail. First one is a really fascinating book. It's called Sticking It to the Man. It's a nonfiction book, Revolution and Counterculture in Pulp and Popular Fiction, 1950 to 1980. It's edited by Andrew Nettie. Some of you may know him from the great Pulp Curry blog, and Ian McIntyre. It's a really sizable nonfiction book with a great index at the end, essays on different series, the Lone Wolf series. It has essays on black, gay, every beautiful color pictures of various paperbacks from that era. So I intend to dive into this over the holidays and take a look, because I enjoy reading books about books.
Great.
The other thing I want to draw attention to is a new release from Starkhouse's Black Gat imprint. It's actually a book from 1950 called My Old Man's Badge by Ferguson Finley. Ferguson Finley was a pseudonym of Charles Weiser Fry. And this book was written in 1950. Johnny Malone, son of a murdered NYC police detective, learns that his father's killer is on his trail and gets a chance to seek him out. And it's a very gritty New York book. It looks terrific. I can't wait to read it. Greg Shepard of Starkhouse, who believes that we are very opinionated, sent me a message saying that I might actually like this book, especially after he heard our Ed McBain episode.
Oh, good. Okay, great.
All right, so Christmas is here. We should do a gift exchange. I got you something. Did you get me something?
I did. Yeah, actually, I did.
All right, let me give this to you first.
Okay.
You can unwrap this. I wrapped it very fancily, as you could see.
Gosh, you love me like the brother you never wanted.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very nice.
This is theater of the mind. You should hold the wrapping paper up to the microphone so they could actually hear the crinkle.
The Wall Street Journal wrapping paper.
Tell them what you got.
Okay, so I got The Last Hill by Spencer Dunmore. It says, a vicious battle in the jungle leads to a clash between two officers who fight each other as well as the attacking Japanese.
All right, thing to know about this book, it's a Pinnacle release, and there was a window of time where Pinnacle was releasing foreign novels. This one was written in 1973. It appears that Spencer Dunmore is a real guy, wrote World War II fiction. It's a British book, big font, so it should be a quick read. It's told in the first person, which I like, actually. I think it's really, especially for war novels, when it's some grunt telling the story. And it takes place in Malaysia, or Malaya at the time, in January 1942, where they're literally just defending a hill against a Japanese onslaught. It almost reminded me, from having read the synopsis and the reviews of it, like 300, the Frank Miller in the movie, where it's just a very small battalion of British soldiers have to, deal with just a ton of Japanese people in an onslaught. So it looks great. I know you like combat fiction, and the reviews for it are absolutely terrific.
I'll make that my first read for the new year.
Yeah, it was a British book that Pinnacle got the rights to publish with a very salacious cover.
Yeah, I'll do a podcast episode on it, so it's great. All right, so
this one's wrapped in cardboard, so you're not going to get the special effects sound, so I'm just going to slide it out here.
Slide it out.
Oh, this looks great. The Man of Cold Rages by Jordan Park. It's a 35-cent pyramid book. Let me take a look at the copy right here. I've never heard of this guy. From 1958. Slain Blonde Beauty and Child Pose Nude for Artist Husband. Looks like it's a first-person noir book. This is in terrific condition. I think it's probably never been read. Do you know anything about it?
I don't. I had bought a pretty large stash of books, and I brought them over the last time I came over. Well, it was a couple weeks ago, I guess. And you'd said that one looked really interesting to you. And you're one that goes on deep dives to try to find out who people are, so I'd be curious to find out who Jordan Park is and if he wrote any other books.
Yeah, it smells like a pseudonym, doesn't it? I'll have to look it up in some of the books I have. Well, thank you. What a Merry Christmas this will be.
Indeed.
Those of you who are doing your last-minute Christmas shopping, you can do that through the Paperback Warrior website at paperbackwarrior.com. Every single review we write at the bottom has a buy a copy here. If you click on that word here, you will be transported to our Amazon affiliate page, and then if you wanted to buy like a refrigerator or a moped through Amazon from that, we get a little kickback of that money. And if you're feeling really generous and you want to give a donation to the Paperback Warrior podcast, you can do so by clicking on the donate link in the upper right-hand corner to donate through PayPal to support the show.
Yeah, we just recently upgraded our service with our podcast hosting service to add a little bit more time on our shows, and then also to increase our space, so our archive of shows will still be available years from now. So that's kind of what we spend our money on.
All right, should we go into the best of 2019?
Let's knock it out.
All right, so let's see here. So the idea is, what are the 3 best books we read and reviewed in 2019? Reviews for all these novels can be found at paperbackwarrior.com. I'm going to flip an ace double. The one side is The Deep End by Owen Dudley. Marry in Haste, Repent and Murder is the tagline. The other side is The Quaking Widow by Robert Colby. Would she live to enjoy her legacy? We've reviewed some Robert Colby on the site. He's real good. So which one do you want yours to be?
I tend to flounder in the deep end, so I'll go the opposite direction.
All right, so
Colby.
So you want the Colby side. Okay, I'll take the Owen Dudley side, and we throw it up in the air. Owen Dudley it is. So I'm going first this time.
Nice.
Okay, cool. So my number 3 best book of the year was So Young, So Wicked by Jonathan Craig. This book and Jonathan Craig are on the 3rd episode. We did a feature on Jonathan Craig in the 3rd episode of the Paperback Warrior podcast. His real name was Frank Smith, and he wrote this 1957 killer for hire novel called So Young, So Wicked, which hasn't been reprinted since it's 1950. Actually, it looks like it was reprinted in 1960, but not since then. So you got to find yourself an old copy. It reminded me a lot of the Quarry novels by Max Allan Collins. Steve Garrity is the star. He plays piano in a Manhattan after-hours nightclub, but he also works as a hitman. He gets hired by a local mob handler to kill a 15-year-old girl in a small town, but he's supposed to make it look like an accident. He has no idea why the mafia wants this pretty teen murdered, and his bosses aren't telling him. What he does is he also tries to figure out why the syndicate wants this teen killed before he kills her. And there's so many great twists and turns. The cover of the books really make you feel like a child molester because it makes it look like it's one of those juvenile delinquent books with this girl who's like just hot to trot. It has nothing to do with what's inside the book. What we have here is a very dark and violent paperback. I don't want to say too much about it. I'm just kind of surprised that it hasn't been resurrected as an ebook because some of Jonathan Craig's books have. But I look, because I wanted to turn people onto this book, you can find lots of copies for under $10, and it's totally worth the investment. This one was one of the best books I've read in ages, and it's my number 3 book of the year.
Nice. I love it.
Again, that was So Young, So Wicked by Jonathan Craig.
Okay. So my 3rd best book of the year is Foreign Exchange by British author Jimmy Sangster. There's 2 books. It's the John Smith spy novels. They were influenced by, I guess, Ian Fleming's James Bond series. Sangster's espionage flair was adapted for film. The original novel was called Spy Killer. And Spy Killer and Foreign Exchange have both been released by Brash Books, which is owned by Lee Goldberg and Joel Goldman. So you can get both of these now available as physical or digital copies. I enjoyed Spy Killer tremendously. I thought it was great. It's funny, it's entertaining, it's engaging, and so this is the second book, Foreign Exchange, and it picks up sort of sort of after Spy Killer, but you don't need to read Spy Killer to enjoy this one. They're interchangeable, really. But Foreign Exchange begins with John Smith. He's a destitute private investigator in London, and it's sort of like this hilarious sequence of events. Smith agrees to assist Harvey, his office neighbor and talent agent, in a pregnancy blackmail case. This young singer named Anne has accused Harvey of knocking her up, a problem that she thinks that Harvey can solve by throwing some cash his way. Harvey claims that he didn't have relationships with her at all, only a business relationship. This leads Smith to the club circuit, where he eventually locates Anne, who's smoking hot, isn't pregnant, and attempts to sleep with her many times. Unfortunately, Anne claims Smith just isn't into her type. This sequence really absorbs 30 pages, but I would have been delighted if it consumed the whole freaking book. This is a spy thriller, so that's sort of like the intro, the caveat. But eventually, what happens is Smith's financial distress is explained as a reference back to the closing pages of the prior book. With Smith flat broke and rejected by a sultry sex pot, it's just a matter of time before he accepts another assignment from his former boss, Max, the head of the Secret Service. The service has a Russian double agent that they have been utilizing for years to spill false intelligence back to the Russians. For many reasons, I'm not really going to go into this, but the agent is no longer useful, and they want Russia to take him off their hands in lieu of like a public trial or a prison or anything like that. So to do this, they want Smith to be a planted spy, to be captured and imprisoned in Russia. Then Max will wheel and deal and trade the double agent back to Russia in exchange for Smith. For Smith, it's not bad. It's a month vacation to Russia and the promise of a cool $10,000 for doing the job. But can Max be trusted? Remember, Smith is a former agent. He's now left that business. Now it's just a private investigator. So he, based on the last novel, he really doesn't have a whole lot of faith in Max. But Max is sort of throwing him out to the wolves, and the whole thing is it's really an interesting book because it has a lot of interrogation sequences between Smith and the Russians, which, Tom, I think you probably enjoy.
I love that stuff.
But it's hilarious. Sangster's, have you read Jimmy Sangster?
I read Touch Feather.
Touch Feather. Did you like it?
It was good. It was kind of a lighthearted book. It was about a flight attendant who became a spy.
Okay.
It was well written, and I didn't read Touch Feather 2, although I wouldn't mind reading it. And I remember enjoying it. In fact, I did it as an audiobook, and Lee Goldberg hired like the sexiest voiced British woman because it's a first person narrative, and and she it's one of those. It's not as corny as a lot of the like the Baroness and stuff like that, but she's a highly sexualized woman of the '60s.
Oh yeah,
and they were fun books. The first one was, and he can clearly write.
Yeah, so I'd highly recommend this book. It was funny, it was engaging. I never really knew where it was going to go, so it was really good. And if you're a fan of John Gardner, or if you're a fan of the James Bond sort of spy books, but like British humor, I think you really enjoy it. So give it a go.
Okay, good. One more time. Give me the title and author one more time.
Foreign Exchange by Jimmy Sangster.
That was Eric's third pick. So we're going to move on to my number 2 pick, and that is Fanon #1, Epitaph for a Tramp by David Markson, Markson. So David Markson was one of these experimental avant-garde novelists who was like a highly regarded toast of Greenwich Village back in the days. But he wrote, at the beginning of his career, he wrote 2 hard-boiled noir paperbacks for Dell, starring a private investigator named Harry Fanon. The novels were Epitaph for a Tramp from 1959 and Epitaph for a Deadbeat from 1961. I've read Tramp, and that's the one that's my number 2 pick. I have not read Deadbeat, but I intend to in 2020. Epitaph for a Tramp was also released as Fanon, Fannin, for a 1974 Unibook reprint. And it's narrated by Fanon, this private detective who lives this sweaty and lonely existence in a Manhattan Fleabag apartment with his books. Anyway, so the book opens one sleepless night at 3:30 in the morning. His door buzzer's ringing. The uninvited guest is his estranged ex-wife, Kathy, who he hasn't seen in a year. Upon arrival, up to his apartment, she collapses into his arms and dies moments later from a stab wound. So he doesn't have a client, but he's got a murder to solve. Now, we quickly learn that Kathy was no angel during their marriage. She was the kind of tramp you would name a book after. I'm not going to spoil any of the details, but the flashback detailing their relationship was one of the best chapters I've read this year alone. It was just a hell of a ride, and you want to know more about this girl. Fanon's not a typical hard-boiled private eye. He makes funny wisecracks like Shel Scott, and he's got the normal genre tough guy talk like Mike Hammer, but he's also smart as hell, and he drops a lot of literary references along the way. This is a really violent read. I mean, a character gets tied to a chair and burned with a lit cigarette. And there's some very graphic beatings as Fannin is stalking the New York streets in search of the bad decisions that led to Kathy's fatal stabbing. Basically, the author took the template of a Mickey Spillane Mike Hammer book and turned the volume up to 11 and has a great twist at the end. It's a mystery story. It's a vendetta story. It's absolutely one of the best novels I've read this year. Everybody I know who's read this book says it's terrific. They say the second book's not as good, but it's also very good.
Nice.
And again, that's Epitaph for a Tramp, also known as Fannin, by David Markson.
Nice. Okay. Well, my second of the year is a favorite of mine. Author's name is Clark Howard, and the name of the book is Last Contract. It was released in 1973 by the iconic staple of 1970s men's action adventure paperbacks, Pinnacle Books. Clark Howard, he's a former war vet. He wrote 16 novels, and he was a frequent writer for Ellery Queen and Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine. But the really interesting thing about Last Contract, it provides for a gripping, introspective look at a professional assassin named George Trevor. Trevor is a former Korean war vet who fought in the Battle of the Bowl and became a prisoner of war. And so the chapters sort of alternate in between Trevor and his current job, which is he's sort of like Corey. He's a hitman, and he's working for a shadowy agency called The System. Trevor's made 17, he's worked for 17 years, and he's killed 27 people. And what happens to a hitman when they want to retire? That's kind of what gets explored with, with this book. Clark is looking at this character as sort of reaching the end of his career, and he falls in love with a woman. She's a nurse named Claire, and they start having a budding relationship. So Trevor is trying to figure out some way that he can let the shadowy company, The System, know that he wants to retire. But it's not easy when you're a hitman to just retire. So there's a lot of complications here, and The System, they're not really to be trusted, and they say, hey, go out and do this one last kill, and then we'll just let you go. And unfortunately, it doesn't really work out that way. And so Trevor quickly finds that he's the one that's got a contract on himself at this point. They won't let him retire. So the whole book explores that narrative. Fantastic book, really unusual book. I've never read anything quite like it. But again, that's Last Contract by Simon Clark. You can get that paperback.
Simon Clark.
Simon Clark's the horror writer.
Yeah,
Clark Howard.
Clark Howard.
Yeah. Did you ever read Simon Clark?
I have not.
Great writer.
I have not.
All right.
Okay, cool. So that was Eric's number 2 pick. If this was a more dramatic show, we would have a drum roll now. For my number 1 pick, the best book I read and reviewed in 2019, hands down by a country mile. That book is Wild Wives by Charles Willeford. Charles Willeford was a heroic and decorated U.S. Army veteran. He served in World War II. He actually fought in the Battle of the Bulge. He's got a fascinating personal story. I want to do an entire feature on him next year. Wild Wives was released in 1956. It was his third published book. It was packaged by Beacon Books as a double along with his debut from 1953 called The High Priest of California, a book I read and didn't really like that much. Anyway, over the past 63 years, Wild Wives has been reprinted several times, and it's available today as a $1 ebook, so there's no excuse for you to not read it. It's a pretty short novel. It's narrated by a low-rent San Francisco private eye named Jake Blake. His new client's a lady named Florence, who's super voluptuous and promiscuous, and she's the daughter of a prominent local architect in San Francisco. So Daddy hires a couple goons to tail Florence and ensure that she basically stays out of trouble. And she hires Jake to help shake the surveillance for a couple hours so she could have some unsupervised living. And he's going to get a $25 daily fee for this tasty payday. And it was too much money for him to decline, so he accepts the job. So it seems like a very standard private eye novel at this point, and he's working the assignment, and then things take a total left turn, something that was totally unexpected. I don't want to spoil it for you, but it went from being a very good private eye novel to just a simply amazing femme fatale noir story where he personally gets way too involved with this situation because of this girl. And if you read enough of these books, basically you learn the basic formula, but I never knew where this one was headed. It was sexually graphic in kind of a 1956 sort of way, lots of action and violence. I'm trying to remember the last crime novel I read, and I read a lot of them that was this awesome. The writing is absolutely top-notch, really terrific writing. And he was also having a lot of fun with the tropes of the hard-boiled detective genre. He did a lot of, they're just funny. Like, she clung to me like Jell-O in a molding tin, stuff like that. It's difficult for me to recommend this short paperback with more enthusiasm. If I had the money and the inclination, I would buy every single Paperback Warrior listener a copy of this ebook for $1 and just make it mandatory reading. But I'm not inclined to tell people what to do. But drop what you're doing and read this book. Wild Wives by Charles Willeford is the best book I read in 2019.
You just read another Charles Willeford novel that you didn't care as much for, right?
I didn't. In fact, I'm trying to remember the name of it even.
Yeah.
I think it's reviewed on the site in January, so stay tuned.
Yeah,
I read The Woman Chaser by him. I liked it, but it wasn't really a crime novel. This was a straight-up crime novel. Okay. This was exactly what you expect. And next year I'm going to dive into his Hoke Mosley series that began with Miami Blues. It was from the 1980s, and it was adapted into a movie with Alec Baldwin back in the day.
I remember that.
Everybody loves that series and says it's fantastic. I'm kind of I'm on purpose saving it and savoring it. I also want to read The Burnt Orange Heresy by him, which is supposed to be great, and another book called Cockfighter by him that's supposed to be awesome.
The Burnt Orange Heresy, I could swear was, I can't think of the name. John, what am I thinking of?
Well, they're making a movie of it right now with...
okay, maybe that's what I read then. Okay.
They're filming it as we speak. It stars the guy, Phoenix, Joaquin Phoenix.
Oh, okay. All right.
He's starring in the new one. It may have been a movie before, though. I'm not sure on that.
Yeah.
And he does a lot of writes non-hard-boiled crime novels in a hard-boiled crime style, and so I think you got to know what you're getting into when you read that. But this one was just a straight-up crime novel. It was amazing.
Cool. Awesome.
Okay, so your number one book of the year. I'm dying to know. Actually, I have no idea what you're going to say.
At any given day this year, I could have listed like 10 books that were the best. So I ended up settling on this one, which is a mainstay of mine. Dan Marlowe is a great author. I know that you like Dan Marlowe as well.
Love that guy.
I think you and I both agree that maybe the best caper novel of all time is The Name of the Game is Death, which was his 1962 kickoff to the Drake series.
Drake #1, even though I don't think he was actually called Drake in the first book.
Yeah, he did. I don't think he had a name.
No, it's so good. Go and tell him about it.
Yeah. So anyway, so Dan Marlowe, which should be a feature next year, I believe, but he wrote a 1966 novel called For the Money, and he wrote this. Kind of look at my notes here. So 1962, he wrote The Name of the Game is Death. He wrote 7 standalone paperbacks between 1962 and 1969, but I think For the Money may be one of the best of that period. They were all published by Fawcett Gold Medal. The book introduces us to Jim Slick Quick. He's a former card hustler serving his last days in prison. Upon his release, Quick drives to Desert City, Nevada, a fictional town, to plan a casino heist. But he won't be a sole perpetrator this time. Behind bars, Slick has compiled a team from a trio of fellow inmates who are all within months of their parole. You've got Blackie, the former gunman, which is the muscle of the crew, supplying the seed money to fund the job. You've got Smitty, who's the technical safecracker, and you've got Johnny, who's this young kid who just happened to overhear the whole game plan, so they had to include him. He's one of those guys. But the fictional town of Desert City is nestled between Reno and Las Vegas. It's sort of this smutty cesspool of casinos and hotels that makes a perfect target for a robbery. While planning the heist, Slick obtains a job as a draftsman for the county and meets a lover named Nancy. And this is where things get complicated because he starts to become rather comfortable in his cover as just this legit citizen. He sort of settles in, he buys some property, finds that he really loves Nancy, and now he's starting to second guess the whole thing. Maybe this is his time to actually to go clean and just be and just live life in a positive way. But as the weeks go by and the months go by, we begin to see that two very different versions of Slick. One persona is the heist strategist planning the casino robbery and subsequent escape. The second is this endearing reformed criminal who is cautiously planning routes as a straight member of society with a career and a girl. But once the gang arrives, which we knew was going to happen, Slick's internal conflict provides the sort of the emotional core of the novel. I guess in some ways, the chemistry is sort of like Slick and is like what was it? The two characters in John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. I can't remember what it's George and
Lenny.
Yeah, George and Lenny. It's kind of like that. readers won't be disappointed in this at all. It's, I guess, about 140 pages. And, man, it was just so good. I've loved Dan Marlow's stuff so much, and I haven't read a bad Dan Marlow book.
All right, so if you had, this is 4 for the Money, is your number 1 pick of the year.
Yes.
If you had to put that head-to-head and make a choice between that and Name of the Game is Death, which would you pick?
Name of the Game is Death, for sure.
Yeah, Drake, number 1.
Yeah.
Which also it was fascinating because the book actually has a sequel called One Endless Hour. And I think those 2 books together form kind of one of the greatest books of all time.
Yeah, I would say that they're probably the pillar stones of the Caper novel, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But the second one isn't as good as the first, but it's still really freaking good.
Yeah, I mean the second one begins with a prison break, which was one of the most remarkable prison breaks.
Yes.
God, it's so good. Anyway, but yeah, I gotta check out 4 for the Money. I've had it for years. And that's the problem is working with you and with this production schedule is that when you beat me to the punch on a book I want to read, I just don't read it because I need to read something else to produce the next review for the site. So hopefully going to 4 reviews a week will give me a little breathing room to read other things next year.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, our listeners probably think that this is all we read, but we read other things, biographies and horror novels and sci-fi and things like that.
Yeah.
But we just don't talk about them.
And our production schedule right now is pretty far ahead of time. Like the books I'm reading now are slotted for reviews that are coming out in late January. So right now we got about a month lead time. And so I'm hoping to use that for my New Year's resolution to cleanse my palate and read that new Stephen King book or some nonfiction books that I've found interesting.
Hey, well, what's I think we got a little.
How are we doing on time?
Yeah, we got about 4 minutes. What was the best non-genre book that you read this year?
Oh my God, I'm trying to remember what it was called. It was awesome, but I'm trying to remember it. You tell me yours while I look up mine.
I'm trying to think.
Great. Good. This is what happens when we do impromptu segments that aren't planned.
I read so few, but I...
Okay, I read it. One of my favorite books is called Replay by, I think, Grimwood, something like that. It's like a time travel type of book where a guy basically lives his life, gets reincarnated to himself when he's like 20 years old and gets to live that those years of his life over again with the knowledge of what had happened before. And so there was a book that came out this past year with a female author that had the same premise, and this is going to be extremely unsatisfying because I just can't remember it, and I'm frantically looking on my phone for it, which makes for some very bad podcasting.
I read a book that you actually suggested to me earlier this year, and it was called Pen Pal by Dathan Arbach. And I think it was his first book.
Yeah, it was good. I think it started out as one of those creepypasta stories on Reddit.
And it was absolutely terrifying. And I've read a ton of horror. I grew up reading Dean Koontz and Stephen King and John Saul and all those guys. But, boy, this thing was absolutely terrifying. And he's got a new book out now, which I think is called Bagman. And I want to read it as well.
I heard it wasn't that good. I heard it wasn't as good. Okay, the book I'm trying to remember is called The First 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North. And it's basically about somebody who has to live his life over and over and over again and what he does with that. A little bit like Groundhog Day, but he's living his entire life. And somewhere along the line, he finds that there are other people doing the exact same thing. And there's other people who are doing the exact same thing who are trying to kill all the other people who are who are living their lives. And so it's an amazing, far-reaching book. It has nothing to do with the genre that we cover here. But if you're interested in kind of science fiction-y, time travel type stuff, this is one of the best books I've read that doesn't fall neatly into the genre. I think it was written a few years ago. It's not old at all.
Hey, real fast, what was the best the best 2 movies that you saw this year?
Oh man, I went to Fantastic Fest down in Austin, Texas, and there's a book on a movie on Amazon Prime right now. It's actually not on Prime; it's on Amazon streaming. It costs $5 to watch. It's called The Death of Dick Long, and it was really great. It was especially for fans of this type of thing. It reminded me a little bit of Fargo, and takes place in Alabama, where some hillbilly guys are doing some redneck stuff, and one of them dies, and so they drop their friend off at the hospital. And just kind of leave them at the door of the hospital and take off so they don't get in trouble, and the investigation unfolds from there.
Nice.
So I could definitely recommend that. There's a book called In the Shadow of the Moon, which is on Netflix right now, that I enjoyed a lot. Other people that I recommended it to didn't like it much, but it's also a time travel serial killer story. How about you?
Nice.
What movies do you like?
A movie that you actually recommended to me was Us. It's a horror movie.
Oh, that was good. Yeah, that's the Jordan Peele, right?
Yeah, I really enjoyed that a lot.
That's a smart movie.
Yeah, I thought it was great.
And everyone liked his first movie, but I thought Us was so much better. What was the first one where the black guy goes home with his white girlfriend? And nominated for Best Picture.
Get Out.
Get Out,
Yeah.
which I liked, but Us was just so much better. But I like the horror movies, and this one was more of a horror movie.
Yeah. The other one that I watched that I really liked this year was looking now. Oh, it was oddly enough, this is kind of crazy. It was a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie.
Really?
It's called We Die Young, and Van Damme is actually a former Iraqi soldier who can't speak. So maybe that's why it was so good. He can't actually talk.
It's always a plus.
It was great.
He's not Iraqi, right? He's a Western soldier fighting in Iraq?
Yeah, he was an American soldier fighting Iraq. He loses his vocal cords in an accident or in an explosion, so he can't actually talk. He's living in this really horrible community in like a border town, like California and Mexico, and he's caught up in into the drug trade.
It's a straight to video release?
Straight to video. It's a free watch on Amazon.
He's an older guy now. Can he still do the splits between two chairs like he used to back in the days?
Yeah, dude. And believe it or not, I don't know if you knew this. His daughter is an actress now, and he trained her in martial arts, so she does the same split that he does between two buildings. Yeah, and his
she must have either very long legs or there's very small space between the buildings.
Yeah, I'll show you the picture, but she's gorgeous, and his son does martial arts as well. And he was actually a bad guy in one of the films, and he fought his dad.
The family business.
Yeah.
Well, before we get to the best meals we had of the year, maybe we should just close this out and let people go to work and enjoy their Christmas holidays.
Yeah, let's be done with it. We really appreciate all the support this year, and we have great things planned for next year.
All right, check us out in January. In the meantime, get caught up on the podcast if you missed any episodes, and hit the archives of the blog because we got a lot of good content for you. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you in 2020.
Bye-bye.